Hello and welcome to another video from the Tradelands Nation. This is our monthly world report. As always, we start with a look at the economy. As of January 31st, at the closing bell, the M&G index ended the month at 23,734, up 0.5% or 125 points. It was a rocky start to the year for this index due to the release of a new ironclad that saw an uptick in demand at the end of last year, but the volume of materials and the drop-off in demand ultimately saw this index fall flat for the month. The current downward trajectory should be viewed as a correction, not as a sign of a future crash, as the trend seems to predict. The JSI index saw a post-surge event of wood prices closing at 18,507, up nearly 7%. This change is a continuation in the momentum that we saw in the latter half of 2023, but a correction might be coming as we typically see a re-release of exclusive woods coming over the next few months. The most common of which is heartwood in February. Finally, the earnings index ends at 41,149, a loss of 3%. The decline in prices that we saw in 2023 continued for the first half of the month in January until crates went off sale. Then they stabilized at around 41,200, which occurred at the same time that we saw a stabilization of the wood and metal markets as well. Moreover, throughout the month of January, this index only saw 2 days of positive momentum, indicating that the bearish trend in prices will probably continue for a while longer. For our item spotlights this month, we want to highlight 2 items that were released in the winter event. The first is the Nautilus Blueprint. Last month, we talked about this item expecting to stabilize in the vicinity of ghost voucher prices. As of recording this video, the item is priced at just under 900,000 doubloons, with the ghost ship voucher trading at 950,000 doubloons respectively. However, the blueprint has probably reached its stable point. Looking at the demand charts, we can see that buyer interest, which was at nearly 100% at the start of the month, has slowly tapered off through January, either through those buyers obtaining the blueprint and therefore exiting the market, or by a lack of interest as the hype of the item begins to wear off. The result is a stabilization in prices. Sellers currently have the list price set at around 900,000 per piece, and buyers are standing at around 550,000. So transactions for the blueprint can be expected to fall somewhere within this range. The other item is the late addition to the winter event, and that is none other than the Festive faction capes. For those who have taken the time to actually understand how our price guide works, one question that is inevitably asked every time is why we use index pricing instead of trade pricing on our price guide. And this item is actually a good demonstration of why. Let's take a moment and explain the difference between index and trading prices. The trading price is a literal price at which a player is listing an item. If you were to go into a store and you would see the price listed on a shelf, that's what the trading price is. If a player was selling an item at 1,000 doubloons and another player was selling the same item for 900, then the trading price would effectively be 950. The price changes based on whatever is happening in that specific time period when those prices were checked. Indexed prices, on the other hand, are based on how much movement is occurring from its current price point. Using that same example, the price would have gone from 1,000 to 975. And if multiple sellers had started listing all of their items at 900 instead of 1,000, the price would slowly move towards 900 over time, as it became clear that 900 was the right price point and not 1,000. But it wouldn't be a rapid shift. Index price lines tend to be smoother and more resilient to single sellers that are attempting to take over a market, and they reflect how much momentum the market is making towards a specific price, instead of simply shooting up or down based on whoever listed their item at the last price point. This means that the trade price is more accurate than the index price at any given point in time, because it's a literal reflection of what players are buying and selling in that exact moment. For those who prefer to use trading prices over what is shown on the price guide, which is the index price, this information is available to you in the Items Indexes page. The green bar on these graphs is the buyer's listing prices, while the blue bar is the seller's listing prices, and the white line shows which of these two groups is currently controlling the price point. And this gives you an idea of how much you might have to negotiate if you wish to complete a transaction. But what does all of this have to do with the Festive capes? For 95% of the items that are listed on the price guide, the difference between an index price and a trading price is nominal, meaning that they are close enough to each other that they don't really matter. But the reason we pick the index price on the price guide is because it's more resilient to manipulation, which buys us time to evaluate if a shift in trading prices is real or not before it gets posted publicly. And in that vein, the Festive Capes is an example of that 5% of cases where the price is obviously wrong. At the start of January, where the capes were still available at the premium merchant, capes were selling at about 100,000 per piece. And I will also point out that as of recording this video, they are still available at the holiday merchant. But immediately after going off sale, that's when players attempted to raise the price point to around 1 million per piece. The price guide shows that the index price for this is at 600,000, a reflection of the fact that it still believes that the price should be at 100,000 per piece. But the trading price is 900,000, a clear example of overinflation set by players. In fact, looking at the chart shown on the website, the buyer price has remained consistent throughout this entire time period at 100,000 per piece, which means that the seller price point is highly unlikely to remain at the 1 million asking price. And while this is most likely just a meme price, the truth is there's actually some precedent here, and that precedent is the Berkland Cape, which was released several years back and currently sells for about 1.5 million each. But there are two important factors that allowed the Berkland Cape to demand such a high price point. The first is that the item should not be re-released on a regular schedule. In the case of the Berkland Cape, it has not been on sale for several years. The second is that there has to be few or no similar alternatives available to players, or those alternatives have to be equally as difficult to obtain as the item in question. The problem with the Festive Capes are that both of these factors are currently not true. Players do not require this cape in order to show off their support for one of the three factions. Those alternatives are available at Freeport at a very inexpensive amount. The lone exception to this might be Blackwind, as that cape, when hung in a house, does not have a faction emblem on it. The Berkland Cape, on the other hand, has no good alternatives except for a flag, which is also worth over 1 million doubloons. Moreover, these Festive Capes were released as a way for players to spend excess event tokens, and that means they may make an appearance next year as well, or at least there might be some alternative form of them. The Halloween event showed how this might work, actually, as the devs added to the list of items instead of just erasing the items from the previous year when they did it in 2023. Taken together, this means that even if the Festive Capes were to be priced at 1 million doubloons each, they would not actually be worth this amount until at least this time next year, when we could confirm whether or not some of these assumptions are true or not. Meaning purchasing one of these, in the short term at least, at its current price point, amounts to a long-term gamble that may not actually pay off. In what may be considered the biggest news of the month, TCP capped off an incredible finish to 2023, and now the world waits to see how the Grand Isles will react to their new attempt to create the Cursed Empire. King Zack is said to have sent an envoy to Nova Balreska to gauge interest in forming a coalition to defend against this TCP threat, and in response, the Chancellor of Nova Balreska sent a declaration of war on Whitecrest. It seemed that rather than unite, the nations of the Grand Isles would instead fracture, with the Novan forces now redirecting their efforts towards the south, and several companies that were based in Blackwind decided that this was the time to strike on Hallengard. This was the high water mark for TCP. Never before, since the modern age of Tradelands, had a single entity come so close to taking all of the Grand Isles. In the opening moves, Nova Balreska would move on Freeport. The defenders of the island decided to hide in the caves underneath the island and would remain there for the duration of the war. Rather than focus on the defense of the island, Whitecrest then sent their Ithan fleet on a course towards Salem, with the intent of diverting Novan forces away from the impending invasion. However, Nova would not take this bait, expecting instead that the local garrison on Salem and a support fleet would handle the situation against what they considered a third-rate arm of the Whitecrest Navy. However, as Nova would quickly learn, this was no third-rate fleet. In fact, 2 battle-hardened fleet commanders from one of the oldest houses in Whitecrest was taking this fleet into battle. The 2 commanders operated their fleets independently, cutting off the Novan flagship from the rest of its fleet and removed it from the equation early on. Then, taking advantage of what they perceived to be a mistake by the Whitecrest strategy, the Novan artillery boat assaulted the Whitecrest mortar ship. However, as the 2 sides converged, it became clear that it was actually a ruse, with the Whitecrest reserve maneuvering from behind an island to aid in the ship's defense. This led to the capture of the Novan mortar ship, deepening the crisis that was emerging for the defenders. Unsure if Nova's admiralty was even aware of the attack, a group of defenders armed their ironclad that was stationed at Salem and decided that they would make a run for it, attempting to escape back to the main island. However, this is when the Joint Fleet Command essentially trapped this ironclad, leaving it with nowhere to go. The Ithan fleet had just proved how strong it truly is. As an outside observer, it was clear from the start that the Novan militia was going to be absolutely destroyed. They might not even know what actually hit them. And with their superiority in both firepower and manpower, the Whitecrest Navy would complete the capture of Salem in this single engagement. The capture of Salem was an alarming move for Nova Balreska, but to properly understand the full extent of their dire predicament, we have to look first to the north, where another unrelated event was happening in parallel to this. The Hatchet Company had sent an expedition to capture Fort Werner. If they were successful, Nova Balreska might be finding themselves trapped between 2 belligerents and in danger of having their home island invaded directly. But as luck would have it, Hallengard was the home to a Viking clan whose culture is based in obtaining glory in battle. They weren't going to bend over to the Hatchets, they were going to bury them. Donning their melon helmets, they set out to meet them at sea. And that battle on the sea was a strange one, to say the least. Hallengard had an ironclad. Apparently, they pulled it from a museum somewhere, supposedly as a gift. But these ancient warrior people found the idea of putting coal into a box to make things go a challenging concept. Needless to say, it didn't take long for them to be disarmed and have the ship sunk. But that's when those extraordinary people went back to their basic instincts, and they pulled out their paddles and their guns. And it was on this verge of complete defeat that 2 incredible historic events would occur. Using only oars to aim their cannons, they fired 1 shot, and it was so accurate that it went through the lead ship and struck the Ibis hiding in the rear, causing it to be hauled and sink immediately. And then, of course, with nothing to lose, they simply paddled their boats into the remaining Hatchet ship and boarded it. At one point, they were outnumbered 6-1, and it looked as though Hallen was doomed. But somehow, through some miracle, when the smoke had disappeared and the Hallen relief force had finally arrived, only 1 man was still standing. How is still a mystery. Are Hallen warriors just so powerful that an entire complement of sailors cannot even take 1 down? Was it the fateful last-minute boarding of a single ally who seemed to disappear within the smoke? Or are the Hallen gods so impressed with their show of bravery that they struck down all of their enemies in an invisible bolt of lightning? I mean, who knows? There is actually only 1 man on the entire planet who will know the true answer. But alas, Hallen chose this moment to take this fight back to Blackwind, a show of power to any other who might think that Hallen was an easy target, and here they did their deed well, as no one who would oppose them would be left standing. The Hatchets would end up trapped on the far side of the cove, climbing the rocks to gain a better elevated position. But to a Hallengard, climbing rocks is merely a sport, and firing arrows while doing it is said to be a skill that is taught to all warriors at the age of 3. Thus, The Hatchets could do nothing in the end except beg for mercy, and that is exactly what they got in their end. So for the time being, Nova Balreska could breathe a sigh of relief. Now it was time to secure their own position. They decided to vacate Freeport and make their way back to Salem. Unbeknownst to Whitecrest, their attack had accomplished its goal of forcing Nova to redirect all of its efforts, and by the time Nova arrived at Salem, Whitecrest was already on the move towards its next target. Carronade Key, as it would later be known. This was a recent addition to the TCP territory after it was captured from ABM last month, and would have a significant increase in the group's economic power. But now Whitecrest sought to end this dominance. The battle started as a long-range artillery duel, but as the ships inched closer together, the doctrine of close quarters fighting was used by both sides. This caused the sea battle to devolve into hand-to-hand, ship-to-ship fighting. While the scales of the battle would teeter towards TCP's favor, Whitecrest would ultimately come out on top. As the sea battle had been raging, the TCP soldiers stuck on the island had no way of responding and merely had to wait for the inevitable invasion, leaving the door open for a direct invasion of Carronade Key, and that is exactly the step Whitecrest decided to take. The push into the town was brutal, pushing TCP all the way up to the Onyx Cliffs, where they were stuck in a slow and steady push against the rocky cliffs on the western side of the island, until they were ultimately crushed against this cliff and pushed out into the sea. Whitecrest would ultimately capture this island, with TCP losing a critical part of their empire, possibly permanently losing it, as it was on the western side and they currently had no way of taking it back. The question, though, was where was King Zack during all of this? Whitecrest's Third Fleet had been doing most of the heavy lifting so far, but where was his First Fleet? They had yet to participate in a single battle. Yes, there was a rumor that his top commanders had donned some of the Mehl helmets and fought secretly at the battles of Hallengard, but these are merely speculation. And of course, this speculation was put to rest when the First Fleet, led by King Zack, emerged and attacked the main TCP fleet located at Corsica. And the battle here was decisive, and yet TCP would not go down without a fight. Much like the last two battles, the TCP fleet was taken off guard by this move, but still, this was their main fleet. And even being on the back foot, they still presented a formidable challenge. King Zack, using his ever-famous pigeon, refloated after the war with Nassau, led a direct assault on the enemy flagship. The move would cause the crew to be distracted, allowing other Whitecrest ships to ultimately board with their own contingent of Marines, overwhelming the TCP crew and taking a victory at sea. The next move was to land on Corsica itself. After 3 separate feints, the first landing was ultimately made on the southern side of the island. And when TCP defenders withdrew a detachment from their fortified positions, the landing on the north and west commenced, overwhelming the remaining garrison at the fort. What started as a fighting retreat into the village turned into a rout. The remaining defenders were able to make it all the way to the eastern shore, a sign of their cunning and combat prowess, as the Whitecrest forces needed the entire length of the island to ultimately stop them. Here, the Black Cloak Regiment formed up in a last stand, and to that end, they only capitulated after Whitecrest brought up an artillery ship behind them. TCP's hope of creating their empire was now nothing more than a dream. But while history will remember the outcome, it's also important that we do not forget how close they came. They may now have set the bar for which any future pirate nation will have to strive for if they want to have their own attempt at becoming a world power. And while TCP may not have achieved their goals, TCP's reputation still remains. They are considered to be one of the most fearsome pirate crews in all of the Grand Isles. To be a trader looking through a spyglass, to see their iconic emblems atop their mast, To see their soldiers wearing the black cloaks over their shoulders, these will strike fear into any trader in Tradelands. And as the Whitecrest soldiers standing atop the fort look down at the negotiation below, we will remember that TCP didn't lose because of their lack of courage or conviction, for they had much of this. They merely lacked the right allies. Pershovia, as we would find out later, arrived too late in the Grand Isles to save them. Some might even say that they were intentionally abandoning them. But as the two leaders representing Whitecrest and TCP shook hands, the world would change forever. Whitecrest. One must wonder why it is always Whitecrest that is left to protect Tradelands. Why, even given the opportunity to be heroes, other powers still always decline when their moment comes, either because they seem to lack the strength or the will to protect players in this game. And through it all, Whitecrest has consistently been taking the high road. Despite all odds, despite the uphill battles in front of them, they have always stood firmly in support of the Grand Isles, and today the Empire of Whitecrest is born, and leading it all is none other than Emperor Zack. As the history books will remind us, he took the throne of Whitecrest when it didn't even have a throne. The kingdom was even on the verge of bankruptcy, struggling to even maintain the few battle-ready ships that it had available to it. And he took all of this and converted it into a coherent fighting force, rebuilding the dormant trade lanes, fending off numerous threats to destroy the Grand Isles, even defeating one of the largest navies in the entire world, and having united the majority of the Grand Isles. I mean, what more could possibly be achieved? Are we not already living in a golden age of Whitecrest? These are the questions on the minds of traders that will go into next month. But there was one final event of the month which would bring an ominous whisper of what was truly coming. And with the void in power left from the fracture of TCP, the pirate captains formed a Battle Royale at Blackwind Cove. In this duel for the best performing crew, the Blackwind Berserkers would ultimately come out on top, being the last flag standing as they pulled into the dock. No small feat given their situation. And the Celtic Bandits, the group that was previously displaced by TCP at Corsica, would be recognized as the most aggressive pirate crew, having caused the most damage. One final important event occurred, and that is the story of the navies of Whitecrest and Nova Balreska, which were caught in the middle of this Battle Royale. They decided to have a parley while they were stuck between the rocks at Blackwind Cove. Here, they exchanged information, evidence of an incoming Pershovian fleet, as well as the news that Birkeland was looking for BFFs, and the realization that these two nations probably had more in the ways of common interest than they did in differences. And surrounded by all of these black flags that were trying to kill them, a peace agreement between the two leaders was made. And once they returned back to the respective bases, they looked to the west, where Pershovia was said to be approaching. But that is a story for another month and another day. But thank you all for watching, and we hope to see you all in-game.